Now I know what you're thinking, what on earth is Blade Arcus Rebellion? Well, it's an enhanced version of a pretty niche 2D fighting game that's only really been available in Japan. The fact that it's published by none other than Sega, however, and featuring characters from their well-loved but rather forgotten Shining series, it's a bit of a curiosity, and that's why I took the plunge on this one. I'm Jordan from SwitchWatch, and I'm going to see if this one is worth the import for you guys. Before we get into it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're new here. We offer high quality reviews and features for all your Nintendo Switch related needs. It's well worth it, guys. Describing the story for Blade Arcus has two immediate problems. One, the fact that it's a fighting game where each character has their own unique mini story, and two, it's not in ruddy English. As an import, this fighting game only supports Japanese, Chinese and Korean, and since I've lived in China for 6 years, I obviously went for Chinese option. But still, it was almost impenetrable. However, since I suspect that about 99% of our audience doesn't have the luxury of knowing any of these Asian languages, the story will be lost on most of you, I feel. I don't think it's a huge issue. It's nice that each character has their own story, but when you only have 3 or 4 short talking segments between static characters, you're not missing out on a whole lot. Indeed, even the endings are somewhat anticlimactic, not particularly incentivizing a playthrough for non-fluent readers of these languages. So let's move on to the gameplay. Blade Arcus Rebellion is a simple enough 2D fighter with a slight 2v2 flavor. You have 3 basic attacks which can be changed into special moves via button combinations of the usual fighting game variety, your quarter circle inputs and such. If you play Street Fighter, you'll feel comfortable enough with this one. On the character selection screen, you'll be invited to choose your primary character and secondary character. Obviously, you'll be fighting with the primary fighter, with your support character jumping in for a cheeky attack with the press of the B button. You can't switch between fighters mid-battle like in some games, but you can between rounds. With 21 fighters, 5 more than the original release, it's a decently sized roster, especially considering this is technically still the first entry in the series despite having some upgrades over the years. All of them are from the Shining series, although as someone who's not really delved into that series much, all of them are lost on me aside from the lady from the latest Resonance Refrain. Many of them play very familiarly, and button inputs don't change between characters, so you can pick up and play any of them. Mastering and chaining combos, however, will take a fair bit of learning, something I struggled to do during my short time with the game. It's a simple game and not one that will trouble the tournament scene anytime soon, but whether with friends or against the CPU, you can have simple enough fun if you want to button mash or take it seriously. It's accessible for sure, but I do think it's not quite as smooth as other fighting games on the Switch. Your characters do feel a little stiff and whacking your opponent isn't quite as satisfying as you'd hope. As for modes, well, there's a few, but they're your usual standard fighting game affair. You have the story mode, arcade mode, free mode, online play, missions, as well as a training mode. They all do pretty much what they say on the tin. I will say that the mission mode is more of a tutorial for characters rather than being as ambitious as the name suggests. Each character has 6 short missions to do, in which you have to pull off biggish combos. As someone who's naff at this sort of stuff, even most of the early missions provided a bit of challenge for my amazingly poor timing. These are not quite the grand tutorials of something like BlazBlue, but it's a nice little aside for those wanting to pull off some of the more advanced moves with their favourite characters. Not that you'll need to on most of the difficulties. There are 5 difficulty settings, and even on the default normal difficulty, I found it pretty much a cakewalk against the AI in most situations, especially in story and versus mode. The arcade mode did present a few hurdles when it came to the last few fights, but nothing too major. I implore those who have played fighters before to crank up the difficulty 1 notch at least before beginning. There is plenty of art to unlock using contract points that you gain via fighting, and for me, this is what kept me going and wanting to fight more and more. I actually enjoyed the grind of earning points and unlocking high quality artwork. There are skills to unlock too with these points, but I have to admit the language barrier made these something I had to ignore. Visually, I think the game is pretty decent, although you can clearly see a lower budget has been put into this one, or perhaps because it's 5 years old since its original incarnation in arcades. The 3D models, cel-shaded to be faux 2D, don't blend as well as something like Dragon Ball FighterZ, and the arena backgrounds are very low quality with blocky wall textures and few details. Some can look good, like the snowy one, but some really stick out like a sore thumb. I know comparing stuff to an original PlayStation game seems ludicrous, but I don't think some of these background arenas would have been out of the question on that system. In that regard, I think Blade Arcus looks much better in handheld mode rather than on a TV. The smaller screen pushes everything together nicely to make it far more appealing. I know comparing it to a PlayStation game seems really harsh and contradictory to me saying it looks okay, but you know, the characters do look really nice. It's just a shame about the backgrounds. The audio is decent enough. I can't say I noticed it a whole lot during my playtime with Blade Arcus, which in the end probably makes it a bit of a disappointment. You should always notice awesome music while duking it out 1v1. That wasn't the case here. When listening out for it specifically, it was decent, like I said, but it really should have stood out more. I think it was just the lack of variety overall. It felt like I kept hearing the same couple of songs over and over again. And having been heavily spoiled by Smash's massive song library, this seemed almost amateurish. I think more could have been done in the audio department. For value, Blade Arcus Rebellion is only on the Japanese eShop for the princely price of 6,469 dude, which in Western money comes in at $58, 51 euros, and 43 pounds sterling. Now, that's digital. Is it worth it? No, probably not when you look at the competition. It's a fun enough fighting game, but it lacks the quality and obvious budget of other fighters out there. If you're a physical collector like myself, then you may fancy importing a copy which is on PlayAsia for an even grander price of $55, 50 euros, and 44 pounds. If you fancy that, then I'll pop a link in the description below as well as in the pinned comment. I'll even put some links to eShop credit for those wanting to go digital on the Japanese eShop. If you do use those links, then it will help the SwitchWatch team as we will receive a small cut at no extra cost to you guys. So do consider that. Before we get into my final rounded thoughts on the product as a whole, due to its nature, I want to include a new section talking about import friendliness. As stated, the story is in Japanese, Chinese, or Korean. If you don't understand either of those languages, then you'll pretty much be stuffed thanks to the static nature of the cutscenes. There's not a lot to be gained here from non-fluent speakers. Thankfully, that's not the be-all end-all for this game. The main menus are in English, so it's easy to get to which mode you want. Thereafter, it's a little tough, and the option menus, as well as records and contracts, will be pretty much lost on you. A lot of random guesswork will be needed if you want to access some specific option, but at least you will be able to enjoy the main meat of the game without too much issue. As a fighting game, button inputs are pretty much universal, and there's not much getting in the way of you experimenting a little before you'll be right at home with the gameplay. Import-wise, I'd say it's not as unfriendly as you may think if you're not fussed about the story. Before we get into my final thoughts, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment below telling us what you think of Blade Arcus Rebellion. Is it a game you're interested in importing? And of course, subscribe if you're new here. So let's get into my final thoughts. Overall, is Blade Arcus worth the import? Well, potentially. I think fans of games such as SNK Heroines or Blade Strangers may appreciate this one more than just your average general fighting game fan. It probably doesn't have enough competitive depth to entice most people, but if you're in for a bit of fan service for some slightly more obscure characters, this could be a nice little addition to your collection. It does not have English, unfortunately, so you'll miss out on the story aspects, but from seeing how the story mode flows, it's not a big deal. It's all about the fighting, and it's simple enough fun. The visuals and audio project a much cheaper fighting experience than what many of you may be used to, however, and it does come with a hefty price tag. From a non-Japanese speaking perspective, I would give it a 6.5 out of 10. It's alright, but no need to run out for that buy button without thinking about if it's something that you really need. If you're looking for a fighting game that's similar enough, then check out both my reviews of SNK Heroines and Blade Strangers. I don't know why I seem to review all the fighting games. I feel these two would be the first two places to go to get your casual fighting fun. So give those a watch and I'll see you guys over there. Take care.
ありがとうございました。